All right, so today's session, today we're gonna go over in section or session 4. So session 4, we'll discuss few topics, right? So let me just go there. Uh, okay, so software development methodology. So as I said before, software development life cycle is what? It's a framework, right? So
Yeah.
framework, under the framework, there are bunch of methods. So we're gonna talk about some of those methods today. In SDLC framework, there are SDLC methodology. So think that way. I mean, SDLC is a process, but under this process, there are some different methods of doing things or doing or performing that software development process. Under this method, there are like a bunch of other process, right? Sorry, under this process, there are a bunch of other methods. So SDLC is a framework, and under the framework, there are multiple methodology. So we're gonna talk about those methodology. The first is called Waterfall, V-Model, incremental, agile, iterative, and spiral. So there are many other methodology, but in our course, we're gonna discuss about those 6. Then we'll talk about waterfall methodology. So waterfall methodology, under the methodology, there are some other steps, and we're gonna talk about what happened in the waterfall. What is the steps in the waterfall methodology? Almost same as SDLC methodology, by the way. And advantage and disadvantage and V-model overview. So those are the few things you're gonna talk about. So if you guys understand SDLC phases, initiation, identification, planning, those things, it would be much easier for this one. It is like 80% same. Okay. So 80% same phases. So anything when we develop the software and if it is follow waterfall, those SDLC phase will be also applicable for what? Waterfall. So keep that in mind. Then we're going to talk about advantage, disadvantage, and some homework question. And this is, I think, for last sessions or last batch video. So let me kind of start. Okay. So methodology, right? So what is software development methodology? So methodology are like rules or process that you have to follow. So as I said, method means what? There is a different way of doing things, right? So what we are saying, under this process, we have multiple methods. We have waterfall, agile, iterative, right? So the methodology means what? Is bunch of rules that you have to follow to develop the software. Okay, so methodology is a defined guideline to ensure process meets standards. Methodology equal model method outline. So if you're kind of confused about the methodology term, you can also call it methodology as method outline or model. It's also fine.
Can we say it a framework or?
No, methodology is not, I mean, framework. So framework, okay, let me try to give you a good example. So I
Okay.
think I gave other day. So when you build a building or when you build a house, you start putting the column, you start like creating the structure, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about this structure, if you think about those different beam or all those pillar as a structure, you can consider that as a framework. SDLC framework means you build a structure, now you know where the other things will go, right?
Okay.
Methodology means like what type of material you would be like
পদ্ধতি
putting in the,
নাকি?
yes, paddhati, right? It's paddhati. So what type of materials or what types of method you'll be using to build that. So some people can like use the drywall. So drywall means drywall, they will put the drywall in between the beam and they will build a house, right? And some people can use like glass frame or something else. So there's a different methods of different rules they will be using to build a house, right? So those different rules or different way of doing things called methodology. Make sense?
Yes.
So it's very confusing. I know it's very confusing. So that's why I always try to say, don't just kind of go through my lecture notes. Also look into some other research materials and try to write down on your own way. Okay, so once you kind of know what is happening, it's much easier to kind of tell people what is methodology, what is framework. If somebody asks you that, it's much easier to say. So this is more like a definition, right? Software development methodology. What is the definition? The software development models are the various steps that are being selected for development of the project. Okay, so different steps means all those different rules that will be required to develop the software or project. That's what the definition said. There are many software development lifecycle models that have been developed in order to achieve different required objectives. So look at that. Software development lifecycle is a framework, right? Under this framework, it talks about models. Models means those different 6 or 7 things I talked about. We talk about those different models that have been developed. So that have been like, created. In this case, develop means like, they're not talking about software development. They're talking about when they define those methods, right? When they define those different methods, that's what they're talking about in order to achieve different required objectives. So those different methods are created to serve specific purpose, right? It based on however way they are building the software or making the software. Based on that, these particular methods will be selected. That's what they're saying. So the models specify the various stages of the process in order and the order in which they carried out. So what they're saying that, the same thing as SDLC phases, there are also steps in those methodology, and they will also talk about how those steps will be carried out to develop the software. That's pretty much what they're talking about here. So those are more like theoretical questions and answers. If you practice it, I think that's going to be good enough. That has nothing to do with your work thing. You won't be doing anything in your work, or they won't even ask you any of those things when you go to work. But they're probably going to say that, did you work on the waterfall methodology, or did you work on the agile methodology? They're probably going to ask you that. So you need to know what is the difference between two. So that's the whole purpose of going over those different methods. Any question on those two?
No.
No? Oh, good. Okay. So those few things you guys have to probably memorize. Different software development methods or methodology. One called Waterfall, V-Model, incremental model, agile model, iterative model, and spiral model. So I will kind of discuss more detail in this session and next sessions. But if somebody asks you, can you tell me for few software development methodology which is out there? If somebody asks you that, you have to tell some of them. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so the next. Waterfall methodology. So when I talked to you previously that if you know or if you understand the SDLC phases, it is more like 80% same. Okay. So waterfall methodology are the sequential execution. So I think let me kind of show you the picture first. So in this methodology, what happened? First, it comes requirement analysis, right? Then it's gonna go to the system design. It's gonna go to the implementation, then testing, then development, then deployment, then maintenance. Okay, so implementation means development in this case. Okay, so if somebody asks you what is implementation is not what we kind of saw in that SDLC phase. It's not about like pushing that change to production. It's not that. In this case, implementation means what? Development. Okay. System design, in this case, they talk about what? Requirement, they talk about designing the graphical user interface or architectural side, right? So in the SDLC phase, we saw what? We saw requirement, then design, then development, right? In this case, they're talking about just a design, system design. It's like how the system gonna look like what they need in order to run the system. They will talk about those different things, and they will
Mhm.
just kind of build that piece in this phase, and then they will start developing. Okay, and after the developing, it will go to testing, and after the testing, it will go to deployment or what, moving to production, right? So you see that it's very, very similar. It's 80% similar, and the maintenance is also same as before. The requirement analysis you already know. In this case, they'll talk about business requirement and system requirement, right?
Yes.
So the whole um, idea for that waterfall methodology is a sequential. It goes one after another. So it has to, so this thing has to happen first before this thing kicks off, right? You cannot go back to the requirement analysis,
Mhm.
because once you finish this, you are done. You won't be in picture anymore,
Okay.
right? So let's say in this design phase, system design phase, they find some issue in the requirement, right? So they said like, okay, the requirement was not clear enough, or the requirement did not tell us what we have to do when the system will have XYZ or something, in example. If they don't say those specific thing in the requirement phase, and if they move into the system design phase, they cannot add those information anymore, because this phase is already done. Are you clear?
Yes.
The same thing when it goes to the implementation phase or development phase. If they discover some requirement gap, or if they discover some design issue, they cannot go back. It will be just as it is. They will just keep continue, you know. So that's why this is more like, very strict rule. Strict rule means once you follow this, you have to follow it. You cannot go back and make changes or tweak.
What if they wanted to make any changes? Then what would they do?
Yes, it's a good question. So in this, as I said, when the requirement is given,
Mhm.
they will have to go through entire they will have to go through this whole steps, right? And if they have to make some changes, it would be additional change request. So there is another process called CR process, change request. Change request will also gonna baked into here, but for our understanding sake, I mean, I'm not gonna talk about that, because that's gonna make you guys more confused. But the change request basically saying that, if they want to make some changes in between, there is another stakeholders, or not stakeholder, there is another department, or there is another area which will deal with the change request, means whatever change they have to make in the software. In that case, it will go through that change request, it will go through this whole requirement analysis phase, and it will go through this process. It won't be deployed to the production until that change request has been implemented. It's very complicated thing, so that's why I don't want to confuse people. But for you guys, just that this is a sequential phase. It's a one way, it's like a one way shop, means once you get in, you never what turn back. So this,
Uh,
yeah.
mhm. So when they before the deployment, and if there is any change needed, then there is another department who will take care of that.
No, there's another department who will initiate that change request process. So the change request process basically means anything you have to make change
Mhm.
before it goes live. Okay.
Okay.
So this whole thing will keep continue up to here, up to testing, maybe implementation. Let's say maybe implementation. If they find something in here, system design, the
Mhm.
whole change request personnel will be putting a change request. So it will kind of start from the requirement analysis and system design only for that change request, not for other things. Okay, and then it will meet up in here implementation. So if they follow that step, the work will never gonna be stopped. There will be continuous work, because change request will talk about whatever they missed out, right?
Mhm.
But the remaining things can still continue, correct? So
Okay.
that's what happened. The change request is another process which will kind of deal with if there's some changes needed in this methodology. So that's why most of the company, they don't follow that, because it is very complex to add new requirements, because nowadays it's very easy to miss something. You can miss a lot of things. You're not going to realize until you are start developing it, correct?
Mhm.
So that's why many companies, they don't follow that approach.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one thing you guys have to know in this methodology, that the definition, what is the definition of that? What is the characteristic? Means like it is a one-way trip, means like you're gonna go back. um, and also another thing, you have to know those different steps in the waterfall model: requirement, system design, implementation, testing, deployment, and maintenance. Okay.
Can we say development instead of implementation? Or,
Yeah, you can say it. Yeah, I mean, nobody
because this
gonna.
is where it, I mean, I have a little confusion actually.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I said this is very confused. I mean, 80% are same. That's why people can be confused. But you can say development, but implementation. They call it implementation because it's that, whatever requirement they talk about in here, they are implementing it. Means like they are working on it.
Um,
But you are right, development and implementation are almost same thing. So I would not, they're not going to tell you anything if you call this is a development phase in the waterfall. That's fine. Okay.
okay.
Any other question?
No, not so.
Okay, so this is what I talk about so far. The sequential phase: requirement gathering and analysis. All possible requirements by system to be developed, captured in this phase, and documented in the requirement specification document. So what I said, BRD and SRD. So business requirement document and system requirement document. So those two things will be what completed in this phase. System design. The requirement specification from the first phase are studied in this phase, and system design is prepared. So based on the requirement, they will design the system, right?
Mm,
The system design helps in specifying the hardware and system requirements. Means hardware means what kind of server, what kind of operating system it will talk about,
mm,
and all other specific requirements, and helps in defining the overall system architecture, just the overall system behavior or system architecture. That's what they're gonna work in this phase. Okay. Implementation, very simple. Development, if you think about development, this is what is happening. Okay. So the next one is the integration and testing. So integration and testing is, again, I mean, in here they just call testing, but if you just call integration and testing is same thing. Integration means they're gonna combine all those piece of codes which
mm,
develop unit tested, and they will test as a as a package. Okay, because think about it, develop tested like small pieces of code.
mm.
Okay, but they never tested when all those small pieces will come together, and when they try to execute one after another, they did not test that way. And
They
in
just
our,
do their unit testing, right?
yeah, unit testing, right?
Like the way they when they write code, then they just test if the output is coming
Yeah,
according to the right.
they can test their code using like compiler. I think it's
Okay.
very easy way. I mean, they'll just kind of run their logic and see if they receive that output or not. That's their way of testing. But they're not gonna test whoever, like let's say another developer writes something maybe a couple of months ago, they're not gonna test their codes. But
Right.
as part of the whole software, like other piece of code also needs to be executed, right?
Mhm. Yes.
In this case, our job is to make sure that when developer create their own codes, that also works with the old code, right? So
Mhm.
that's called integration testing. So all the Unix developed in the implementation phase are integrated into a system after testing of each unit. That's what I just said. Post integration, the entire system is tested for any faults and failures. So basically, it's talking about you have to do the testing in this phase, nothing else. Any question?
Yeah.
So deployment of the system, again, if you know the SDLC phase, that's the implementation of the on that phase. Means when everything is developed, somebody will be doing some unit testing. I mean, sorry, the business testing or UAT testing, and then they will push that or release that to the market or deploy that to the production. Right? That's
Mhm.
what's gonna happen. Once the functional and non-functional testing is done, the product is deployed in the customer environment or released into the market. The customer environment means what? Production environment. That's what they're saying it.
So as a tester, I mean, will So what we're gonna do actually, just to test the functional testing or non-functional as well.
You have to test functional and non-functional as
Oh,
well. So those
okay.
different types I will talk about in other session, but your job is limited in this step, right?
Mhm,
This step, you are the person who will be working out, who will be testing every pieces of the software to
mhm,
make sure there is not any bug or defect, right?
mhm,
So once you give the green light saying, okay, hey, everything looks good, everything works like a charm, let's move on. And then they will move into the development or sorry, deployment of system phase.
mhm,
Okay. Maintenance, same as SDLC phase, nothing new. If there is some issue come up, they will fix it. If there's a new requirement, they will go back and add that new requirement. Okay. Any question on this SDLC methodology? Because this is a very common one, guys. Probably they're gonna ask you first thing. Can you talk about SDLC methodology? Then you guys have to say this definition, and I ask you guys to do some research and come up with your own wording. But this is my definition. Sequential execution of the software development and management process. In this stage, the requirement activity and analysis are all completed before the system design activity starts. The goal of this method is to never turn back once the requirement activity and analysis is completed. So this is the key, characteristic of this methodology. Okay.
Mhm. Why it's called waterfall?
How the waterfall?
That's one.
Does it fall from below to up, or from up to below, right? The thing about fall, when you see a fall, what do you see? It goes from up to bottom, right? So it just fall from here and goes here. So it's just step by step, it's just falling down.
Mhm.
So that's why they call it waterfall. Okay, so let's go
I
to
don't know why they make these things so complicated actually.
that's a good question. But to be honest, work is very easy. Once you get into a job, is much easier than preparing for the interview or understanding what those means, because those probably something you guys would be learning in your college if you're
Mhm,
taking class, or if you're taking some degree, if you are taking computer information system, they will have a separate course just to talk about those different software development process. Separate course means they will just talk about they don't talk about different testing techniques, manual testing, automation testing. They're not going to talk about anything. They have a separate course. So because some people who kind of get into the job market, they go into the job market after taking those courses, but this is a crash course, right? So
mhm,
I'm trying to give you those information in one single course. So that's why sometimes it's very complicated. But in the school or college, they gave you a lot of time, they give you a lot of materials, they give you a lot of time to consume or understand what is happening. So that's why some people, they don't get confused when they study in the college, but in here is it's crash course, and sometimes it is kind of confusing. So another so it is so advantage and disadvantage, right? So it is very common interview type of question. So I would say memorize it. If you don't understand it, just kind of memorize. So advantage, what is the good thing about this method? So every method has some positive and negative, right? So this method also have some positive and some negative. The positive things are the project objects are clear, because when the requirement is set, they know exactly what they will be getting, because they know that there will be no change in the requirement. Once it is set, there is no change. So that's why the project objects means objective, or whatever they're trying to accomplish are clear. Make sense? Okay.
yeah.
Requirement are stable means once they define the requirement, they're not gonna go back and change the requirement. This is the good thing about the waterfall. Progress of system is measurable means when the project is going to be developed based on the requirement, they already know how long time they need to complete the project. So that's why the progress of the system means they already know what is the progress. So if they are in this step, so they can tell that they have 40% of the project completed, right? If they're in this step. If they're in this step, they can tell 70% of the work is completed. So this is very easy to measure, right? So this is a good thing about the waterfall. Requirement is strictly signed off. So that means the requirements are kind of complete. So nobody gonna go back and make changes. So when there is no requirement changes, that means there is no coding changes needed, right? Because when there's some requirement
Sorry,
changes,
but the way you said, right?
yeah, because most of the change come from the requirement, correct? So if there is no requirement changes, it will be as it is. So that's why it is a very good thing it's a good thing to follow. Okay. So disadvantage, time consuming. So time consuming means this another thing for your just for your knowledge, this methods is the long time process. It's not going to complete in 6 months. It's probably going to take 2 years or 1 year to complete a project. If you follow this method, it would take at least 1 year to complete that project. You know why? Because it just kind of start from step by step. Basically, once you done this, it will go to this, like step by step. And if there's some issue arise in this step, they cannot work on this implementation phase right away because there's an issue. So that's caused delay in the project. It can delay. It can go through at least 2 years if something bad happen, right? So that's why it is a bad thing. That's why it is a bad if you follow waterfall methodology, and it is time consuming.
That makes sense.
Never backward means, again, if there's some change, you cannot go back. So there is some kind of limitation that you cannot change the requirement once it is signed off. So it is never going back. So the question you asked earlier, that what happened if there is somebody change in the requirement, if somebody has to make some change? Because of that, because of this kind of rules, that is kind of a bad thing for software development, because change can happen, but if the methods you are following, it cannot able to take that change, or it cannot able to handle that change properly, it can delay the project. So that's why many companies, they don't follow waterfall. That's one of the reason.
No wonder why they don't follow that.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing that many government projects, there's so many government projects, they follow waterfall, and those government projects last for 5 years, 6 years. You know why they last? Because of this. Because sometimes they realize that okay, there's some change in the requirement, then it will go through the whole change management process, change request process. It takes forever. So that's why government jobs are very kind of sustainable, because those things, they follow waterfall, and those things gonna never end. So once you get in, it's gonna keep continue.
Right.
So little room for iteration means there is no way they can make some changes in the process, because it is so strict. Means it is one way, you cannot even add any new things in the phase. So if you want to add something else in the requirement phase, you cannot do that. So this is another disadvantage in this method. Okay.
They will have to go through the whole process.
Yeah,
And
change
have to come
management
back.
process
Yeah.
to add this change. And the last is difficulty response to change. So again, as I said, it's not easy to make change in the waterfall. It has to go through an entire different thing. So this is why it is not suitable for many companies. Any question on the advantage and disadvantage?
No.
Okay. So I would say if you understand this, maybe you have understand 30% of what you need to know for SDLC framework and methodology, because waterfall is one of the key thing that many of the interviewer gonna ask you. They'll talk about, did you work on the waterfall? Can you tell me what happened in the waterfall methodology? So then you can talk about this. They probably can ask you, what is the bad thing about the waterfall? What is the good thing about the waterfall? So then you can say something about this.
Right.
সবুজ ভাই আর বুঝছেন সবকিছু very clear?
জি ভাই।
Okay. Next is another called V-Model. So this is a very confusing model as well, but nowadays many companies they don't follow this model, but for our interview sake we need to kind of go over, right?
This
Okay.
looks more complex than waterfall actually.
Yeah, exactly. It is real complex. So let me just kind of see something. So okay, so let me see if I can explain you differently. um
It look like scary.
Not scary, much easier. So the reason it called V model because of the shape, right? Because it look like V.
Whoever made this, I mean made a big mistake there because it looks like the waterfall thing, I mean the waterfall methodology, but
Yeah, I mean you were kind of right on that sense because there is some limitation in the waterfall, because as I said, waterfall cannot able to handle new change.
Mhm.
That's why they came up with this model, V model. It's more like an alternative model, but there's some sort of like limitation in this model. That's why many companies they don't follow as well. Like for your understanding, if they ask you about, can you talk about what is V model,
Mhm.
you can say what is a V model, and you can just give your own definition. And I did not put a lot of time on a lot of information on this V model. The reason I did not put it because it is not very commonly used. It's just I'm just putting here for you so you kind of familiar with it, right? Just just kind of bear with me. So the V model, what happened? So it start from the requirement gathering or user requirement engineering. So they call it engineering, but just think that way. It's system user requirement gathering. Okay, in here they gather the user requirement, but when they gather the user requirement, same time acceptance testing can happen. So
What
when I
is
let me explain. So acceptance testing means they are not executing the code, they are doing what? They are verifying the requirement.
oh,
Remember verify, validation, and verification? Remember that?
mhm.
So when they gather the requirement, by looking at the requirement, they kind of verify whether the requirement is actually good enough or not. So this is called acceptance testing. Means like visual inspection of the requirement. Those two things can happen in the same time.
So we can say, I mean, in VModel, whenever they do a certain area, they just test that or something like that, or
They don't really test. I mean, if you just
uh,
go this step, so
mhm,
let's kind of focus on this step, right? So in this step, what is happening? They're collecting the requirement. Okay. But in the same time, there's another group of people. They are doing visual inspection. Not visual inspection is they're kind of reviewing the requirement to make sure the requirement is complete, the requirement has no issue, the requirement is gonna serve whatever the client is expecting. It's called visual inspection or verification. They're verifying the requirement. Just think that way. So if you know the verification term, that will make sense. It's called acceptance testing in this case because they're kind of making sure. They are
mm.
not executing the code, they're just kind of reading through and they're kind of analyzing this and making sure the requirement is solid. Make sense? Pabi, you get it?
Mm.
Yeah.
I think this is much easier than the waterfall methodology. It looks easy actually.
Yes, if you, it's easy. That's why they came up with this model because the
Mm.
waterfall has some limitations. So this is what happened in the user requirement phase, and then system requirement engineering. Okay, so system requirement engineering in this case, what happened? They will gather those system requirements, right? So think that way. This is a business requirement phase. This is a business requirement gathering. This is a system requirement gathering. Okay.
Mm.
So they will gather the system requirement. And the same thing, they will do what? System testing. So system testing, you don't think that as a real testing. It's more like another verification. They're gonna look into the system spec. They will make sure that whether those specification gonna serve client purpose or not. So one is called business requirement verification. This is the system requirement verification. Make sense? So system requirement verification means same thing. You're gonna read the system spec, make sure the system spec is there or not. That's pretty much what you have to do in this phase. And now you have what do you have? Architectural engineering. So this is kind of complicated in a sense that you have to have some technical knowledge, or you have to have some sort of high level SME or subject matter expert, right? You have to be subject matter expert to be involved in this phase. So as a QA tester, even though it's called system integration testing, when they design the whole software architecture, in the same time you may have to give some input, like, okay, so you are building the software with Microsoft Windows operating system, but Microsoft Windows, based on my previous experience, I know Windows has some limitation, or Windows have some issue when it has XYZ. You're just kind of giving some feedback based on whatever you are seeing. So this thing can happen in the same time though. Okay. So that's why I said, when in this step, when it comes, you still can able to give some feedback based on your technical knowledge or SME knowledge. Make sense? It's very confusing, I know, but what I'm trying to say is that bear with me. Like, means each time, each of the phase has some input and output. So the input is when the system analyst, or when those people or architecture gonna design the system spec or system architecture. The same time, if you're SME or if you know the system well, you can able to give them some feedback, right? So whatever you are seeing here is just kind of feedback. There's nothing is you are not testing, you are not executing anything. It's just more like feedback and opinion. Okay, so you are not doing any physical testing. You are not doing anything. So this is why it's just like, this is like verification. So VModel in here is called verification, and in here is called validation. So if you think that way, the left would be verification. Means when those things happen, your job is to verify it, right?
Right.
And then in the right side, I'm going to come to the right side later, but in the right side, when this thing completed, you're going to physically execute something, and it's called validation. I'll come to that point, but just bear with me. So that's what happened in here. Based on your technical SME, you can able to give feedback. So design phase, when they design same thing based on your knowledge or SME subject matter expertise, you also can give them some feedback saying, okay, this is what, so this is something you can able to do. This is something you can do to do it better or something like that. You can also give some feedback. Okay. And then coding, software warehouse or fabrication, software and hardware. So coding means where the developer is going to start coding, physically coding. So let's say they get through all this, they get the information, they get the design, they get the architecture done. So now they came to the coding. So coding means they're going to start working on it physically. So all this thing is more like information gathering to make sure they're going to develop the right software, right? So in here, they're gonna start coding it. So once the developer code, what they do? They do unit
Yeah,
testing, right?
testing.
So now let's gonna go through this way. So at first it come to that point. Now you are moving up to this cycle. So when you see that dot line, those are basically they are saying what would be your input. So I would say those are inputs. So when you are in here, what would be their responsibility in that point? So their input should be what? Visually inspecting the requirement, visually inspecting the system requirement, giving them some technical feedback, and in the design phase they're also going to give them some design feedback. So in this phase their job is to give them a feedback. Okay, so now you are in the execution. So execution is what? Validation, right? So verify is when you see it or verify it, and validation means when you're going to execute that thing. Are you guys getting me?
Yes.
So I will tell you one other thing, the easy way to kind of memorize that or remember that. But just now, so when the developer finish coding, it will be unit testing. They will be doing the unit test. Then once
One
they,
question, Zubai, if you
yeah,
don't mind.
yeah,
So you said whenever, I mean, for architecture engineering, you
yeah.
said we might have to test the system. I mean, the system interrogation testing, right?
It's not
So,
testing. It's just feedback. At this phase, at
mm,
this phase, when it is in here, your job is to give them some feedback on the technical architecture or SME. Or
okay.
if you're an SME, if you know the system well, you can give them some feedback saying, okay, this is something you should do with Windows operating system, or you should be using like some other specific hardware. That's what you
Is
have
it
to.
is this mandatory for us to give them feedback or?
No, that's why people can't even follow this model because nobody know
Oh,
all this.
okay, okay.
That's the another limitation of that because nobody really know whatever they're building.
Mm,
How am I gonna know all this? Because I'm not gonna care because I'm not supposed to know all those like companies architectural side, how they build things, what is their protocol. I don't know all this, so
right.
that's why there's some limitation there as well. So you're gonna have to know that, but you need to know what your role would be when it is in that architectural engineering or design phase, just for your knowledge purpose. You're not gonna do anything. So once the unit test done, you do what? Integration testing. So integration testing is what you're gonna basically put together those codes and make sure they are working fine, right?
Mm,
So this is the validation. This side, right side is the validation, left side is verification.
mm,
Okay. So now all those things is kind of going through this way, right? So now all this thing you will be executing it, you'll be validating it by running some testing, right? So in here you're gonna do some integration testing, then the system testing. So system testing, making sure this testing the overall system. So you're not gonna look into the only areas where developer make the change, right? So if the application has 5 module or 5 tab, so for an example here, let me see, go back here. For an example here, if you have those 4 or 8 different tab, the developer make change in this tab only, right? So in the integration test, you're only gonna test all those codes that are touching in this home icon or home button, right?
mm,
That's what the integration testing. But the system testing is you're gonna test every single thing. You're gonna test entire thing. You're gonna test all the tab and all those different options that are out there.
mm.
Make sense? So this is the
This is getting more complicated actually.
yeah. I mean, it's not that complicated if you understand. It's much easy. So integration testing just focus on the area where developer make change or programmer make change,
Mm,
and that's how you're gonna do the integration testing, right? In system testing, you're gonna look into the entire thing. You're gonna look into all different things. Make sense?
yeah.
Okay. Um, so that's that. So one is called subsystem, another called system, another called system integration. The subsystem. Okay, so let me tell you the subsystem. So you see that those options
Mm,
Mhm.
they call subsystem. So that's how we should think. So let's say the developer actually make changes in this option, live software testing codes, right? This called subsystem, okay?
mm,
And now if you go back here, the next is system integration. So I'm just giving you an example. It cannot be same. So system integration means now you have to make sure that whatever the developer make change in this option, whether it has any impact on the other things. Okay,
mm,
so that's called integration. Okay,
mm,
and now we're talking about system as a whole, general means like whole thing. We're talking about all those different options. So when they make some changes in here, whether it has any impact on this model, this module, this tab, or this tab, that's what they're gonna kind of look into.
okay.
So I mean, that's why I say always look into the example and then try to give you the definition. subsystem, system integration, subsystem integration, system integration, and then another called system testing. Is that entire testing? Okay. So those are you are basically testing the code. And the acceptance means what? UAT testing, right? This is what the business user will do to make sure it is matching the requirement. So that's pretty much what is the V model. So I know there's very confusing, and I don't want to give you a lot of information and make you more confused. And this is not very common one, but for your own understanding, I would say just kind of keep that in mind. How to remember that? Left is what? Verification.
Verification.
Right is validation.
Yeah.
And in between is called input. You can call it input.
Okay.
So what happened when this is happened? Your job is to give some input on this, like whether the requirement is complete or not.
So what is our job as a QA? I mean, in VModel, like VModel, yes.
Okay. So QA they consider as a technical person or business, or more like technical plus business. Okay. So we know the business, we know the technical side, we know the business side. Because when you test something, you need to know the business rules, you need to know the system rules, right? So as part of our job function, we need to know those different things. We need to know what the business requirements are, system requirements are. So they expect us to give some feedback, because as we analyze those requirements, as we review those requirements, we may gonna find some stuff, and based on our finding, we can give them feedback.
So you said, as you said that it's not mandatory that we will have to give them feedback.
We have to
Yeah. So in V model, where is our? What is our job exactly? In this model, like there is no QA.
So
Or
one thing I just want to tell you guys and kind of feel you guys safe, because this model is probably 5% of the company they follow this model.
okay.
So that's why I'm saying you guys would not be doing anything or not gonna even follow this V model, because they don't even like exist anymore. But
Yes.
if they do exist, yes, you have to kind of give feedback as it goes through different phases. Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's how it is, that's how they define. So it's nothing I can do or like any other company can do. If they follow this model, yes, you need to give feedback. They're gonna give you some business requirement and system requirement, and they're probably gonna ask you, okay, give me your feedback on those, what do you think? And they're gonna probably provide you some document design document to tell you, okay, that's how we are designing it. Do you understand it? Do you understand that? Do you have any input? They're gonna ask you that, so it's not that tough.
Okay.
I also gave feedback on many of the requirements personally, so it's very easy. It's not a big deal. Once you read through the requirement, once you understand some of those requirements, what they're saying, it's much easier to give feedback. So that's not a big deal. Any question?
No.
Shobuz bhai, I know we're probably gonna meet later, but if you have any question, make sure you write it down, and then we can discuss. Okay.
Okay.
So there's a lot of information. I know it's only 3 page, but it kind of contains a lot of things. All right, let's kind of go back. So we go through some of those methodology, then waterfall, advantage, disadvantage, and we gave VModel overview, right? So the homework assignment. Okay, so in your own words, describe the process of waterfall methodology. So again, in your own words. So what you have to do, you have to go back to the waterfall, read through them, and maybe you have to tell me like in a couple of things what happened in each of those phases or each of those step, right? In your own word. And then advantage and disadvantage of VModel. So I didn't put down that, but this is something you guys have to do some research in online and come up with some advantage and disadvantage of VModel. Difference between VModel and waterfall. What is the difference? Okay. And another behavioral type of question. Why should I hire you as a software QA analyst? Software QA analyst. Because most of the job interview, they're probably gonna ask you some of those behavioral questions. So you have to prepare for them. So those are the 4 questions I have.
Honestly, I have no idea what to say in this question actually.
The last question.
Yeah.
Just do simple Google search. Just copy and paste. You will see lot of hit. You will see a lot of search result. Just read through them 5 or 6, and I think if you read 5 or 6, you probably know what they're talking about, and then you can come up with your own answer. Okay. Um, what else? So anything else you want me to cover? Because and also I'm gonna add the recorded session here. And how many of you actually go and watch those videos after I upload them? Because if you don't watch them, there's probably no need for me record, or there's no need for me to upload. But that's what I'm saying. I mean, do you guys kind of
Also,
watch?
I need it. We
Okay,
need it.
okay, good.
Mm.
I don't mind uploading it, but I feel like sometimes you guys don't even watch because I can kind of see it in my YouTube, like how many people are watching, or you know if they're even like caring about this, because sometimes you just have to let me see if I can go back. Yeah, because there's not too many people are seeing it, because I made those sometimes private, so you just have to like there's like bunch of other um videos out there, and I have some from like I think my last batch. So make sure you watch them. I mean, if you think it's kind of helpful, it's just kind of watch them. And there's also subtitle option available, so it kind of automatically add the subtitle, so that's also good. So the next session we're gonna kind of talk about iterative and incremental one. So that's another things we'll kind of talk about in the next session. There's also kind of similar thing, and we also have some notes. So we'll go through that. So that this week the session is going to be Tuesday and Thursday. So today is our 4th session, right?
Yeah.
The 5th session going to be Tuesday, and then number 6 going to be on Thursday. So what time? 8 o'clock is good for you guys for next Tuesday?
I'm fine with anything.
Okay, Shabuz bhai, you good? Tuesday at 8 o'clock?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if it's okay with you, then yeah, I
Yeah.
think we're good at 8 o'clock.
Okay, 8 o'clock Tuesday. Bhabi, I think you're fine, right?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, let me just get the recording. Oh, no. Cancel.
Recording helps a lot.